ഈ ASA എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞ അമേരിക്കൻ സൊസൈറ്റി ഓഫ് അനസ്തീഷ്യോളജിസ്റ്റ്, അതുപോലെ ANZCA ഓസ്ട്രേലിയൻ ന്യൂസിലൻഡ് സൊസൈറ്റി ഓഫ് ഗ്രേറ്റ് ബ്രിട്ടൻ ആൻഡ് അയർലൻഡ്, ഈവൻ നമ്മുടെ ISA എല്ലാവരും മോണിറ്ററിംഗ് സ്റ്റാൻഡേർഡ് ഇറക്കിയിട്ടുണ്ട്. പക്ഷേ എനിക്ക് തോന്നുന്നു ഏറ്റവും ആദ്യം അത് ചെയ്തിട്ടുള്ളത് ASA ആണ് 1986. ആൻഡ് ബാക്കി എല്ലാ ഇതിനുള്ള സ്റ്റാൻഡേർഡായിട്ട് നമ്മൾ കണക്കാക്കുന്നതും ASA മോണിറ്ററിംഗ് സ്റ്റാൻഡേർഡാണ്. അപ്പോൾ ഇതാണ് അവരുടെ ഡോക്യുമെൻ്റ്. സ്റ്റാൻഡേർഡ് നിങ്ങൾക്ക് കാണാതിരിക്കും, ക്ലിയർ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഞാൻ വായിച്ചു തരാം. അപ്പോൾ ഇതിൽ 2 സ്റ്റാൻഡേർഡേ പറയുന്നുള്ളൂ. ഏറ്റവും കൺഫ്യൂഷൻ കുറവുള്ള സ്റ്റാൻഡേർഡ് ഇതാണ്. അതായത് ക്വാളിഫൈഡ് സ്റ്റാൻഡേർഡ് 1, സ്റ്റാൻഡേർഡ് 2. സ്റ്റാൻഡേർഡ് 1 എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ ക്വാളിഫൈഡ് അനസ്തീഷ്യ പേഴ്സണൽ ഷാൽ ബി പ്രസൻറ്റ് ഇൻ ദ റൂം ത്രൂ ഔട്ട് ദ കണ്ടക്ട് ഓഫ് ഓൾ ജനറൽ അനസ്തെറ്റിക്സ് ആൻഡ് മോണിറ്റേർഡ് അനസ്തീഷ്യ കെയർ. അത്രേ ഉള്ളൂ. അതായത് ക്വാളിഫൈഡ് അനസ്തെറ്റിസ്റ്റ് എന്ന് പറയുന്ന ആൾ ജനറൽ അനസ്തീഷ്യ, റീജിയണൽ അനസ്തീഷ്യ, മോണിറ്റേർഡ് അനസ്തീഷ്യ കെയർ എന്തായാലും. Oh, I'm sorry, I was just reminded that there are a lot of students from outside Kerala. I was just assuming that all of you understand Malayalam. Please forgive me. So the thing is, ASA standards are basically 2 in number. The first one states that a qualified anesthesia person, that is an anesthesiologist, should be present throughout the procedure in any situation where you're having general anesthesia, regional anesthesia, or even monitored anesthesia care. Now, this is a standard we all know is breached upon a lot of times. You might also be aware, people start a case, then run off to the next theatre. We sometimes anesthetists manage 2 or 3 cases and all, theatres at the same time. Now, strictly speaking, according to the standards, that is not done, not allowed. So, and that the objective is, so the idea behind is there could be rapid changes in the status of the patient. We all know anesthesia is all about, the situation is smooth, suddenly something goes wrong, things can happen in the bat of an eyelid. The time you take to bat an eyelid, things can change. So that is the idea behind insisting that a qualified anesthesia person should be present throughout in the theatre. And the second standard is, during all anesthetics, the patient's oxygenation, ventilation, circulation, and temperature shall be continually evaluated. So, 4 things are stressed upon: oxygenation, ventilation, circulation, and temperature. So, that is only 4 things need to be monitored continually. And there are 2 words which they use: continually and continuously. I hope you know the distinction between the 2. Continually means repeatedly at frequent intervals. That is not continuous. Continuous means without a break. Like for instance, if you are measuring NIBP, that is a continual measurement. Because you are doing it every 3 minutes, every 5 minutes, it is regularly at frequent intervals. That is a continual measurement. And continuous would be like ECG, is monitored continuously. Or arterial blood pressure is monitored continuously. So that is the distinction between continually and continuously. Now, the monitoring of oxygenation, the objective is you monitor in 2 places. Basically, in the blood, the oxygen level, and also in the inspired oxygen, the circuit. Basically, the oxygen should not fall below a desired level in these 2 places. And the methods for the inspired gas, so during every administration of general anesthesia using an anesthesia machine, the concentration of anesthesia in the patient system shall be measured using an oxygen analyzer with a low oxygen level alarm. That should also be functional and in place. And in blood oxygenation, you all know what we use. We use the pulse oximeter, which is applied on the finger of the patient, and that is a way of seeing to it that the blood oxygen levels are maintained. Now, ventilation, the objective is to ensure adequate ventilation of the patient. Ventilation means exchange of gases, oxygen and carbon dioxide. You take in oxygen and throw out carbon dioxide. The process is called ventilation. Now, methods, it can be clinical and it can be using equipment. So, clinical measurements are obviously the air entry, the chest rise and all that. That shows adequacy of ventilation, so that the tube is not blocked and there is no disconnection and things like that. And what is monitored basically include alarm, ventilators and end-tidal CO2. Basically, the data from the ventilator will show you the volumes, the inspired tidal volume, expired volume, minute volume, the pressures, peak pressure, plateau pressure, all these are indirectly pointing towards the adequacy of ventilation. While using an end-tidal CO2, you will always be looking at what is the amount of carbon dioxide, the concentration of carbon dioxide in the expired gas, which is indirect pointer to the amount of carbon dioxide in the blood, assuming that it is a steady state, with steady cardiac output, steady ventilation. Only when you have a gross VQ mismatch, or when there is a mismatch between ventilation and perfusion, the end-tidal CO2 levels may not reflect the blood levels. So basically it is a measure of the ventilation. And circulation, so the objective is to ensure the adequacy of patient circulatory function during all anesthetics. So every patient receiving anesthesia shall have, like I said, continuous ECG monitoring, and blood pressure and heart rate continuously, and blood pressure most probably will be continually using an NIBP. And you can also have clinical measurements like palpation of pulse, or capillary refill, or things like that, or the color of the blood was used previously. Those are things which you can monitor clinically. But for the circulation adequacy, the most important things are electrocardiogram and blood pressure. And temperature, it is recommended that we know in the theater we maintain a slightly cold environment for the comfort of the operating personnel, and to maintain the aseptic environment, it's a closed space. So there is so many factors which predispose the patient to hypothermia, including the anesthesia itself. So we use generally either a nasopharyngeal probe or a axillary skin probe, and temperature is continuously monitored, and you can see the value displayed there. And obviously, you should not allow the patient to go into hypothermia with all of the attendant side effects. So that is just basic standards. Now let's just take a quick recap. So, this is the monitoring standard, just a quick recap. So, qualified anesthesia personnel shall be present in the room throughout the conduct of all general anesthetics, regional anesthetics, and monitored anesthesia care. That is standard number 1. And standard number 2 is, during all anesthetics, patient oxygen, ventilation, circulation, and temperature shall be continually evaluated. So, looking back, the oxygenation, the physical signs which we look for are color of skin and mucous membrane. That is generally what is the easiest thing to do. But it has obviously got its limitations and pitfalls, the lighting, what skin you are looking at, the color of the skin, all these can always cause a lot of subjectiveness in the interpretation. So the monitors which we rely on for oxygenation are, in the blood it's the pulse oximeter, and the circuit is the inhaled oxygen concentration. And the alarms generally will alert you towards low SpO2 or FiO2 alarms, low oxygen concentration alarms. And ventilation, the physical signs are breath sounds and chest excursion. And monitors using the ventilator data and end-tidal CO2 analysis. The alarms generally for ventilation would include disconnect alarms, ventilatory measurement alarms like high tidal volume, low tidal volume, high minute volume. So many alarms the ventilator will give you. Again, EtCO2 alarms, high EtCO2, low carbon dioxide and all that. And circulation, the physical signs are the pulse which you palpate and the heart sounds which you auscultate. And the monitors include for circulation are ECG, blood pressure and heart rate. And alarms are low BP, high BP, low heart rate, high heart rate, various arrhythmias and all. You will be shown the alarms will be sounding. And temperature, the physical sign is obviously you palpate the skin, you will know whether the patient is, at least if he is febrile or becoming cold and all, you will know. And monitored using temperature probe, common sites are axillary and nasopharyngeal. And you will have obviously a low temperature alarm. Pulse oximeter. Now just a brief 2 words about the pulse oximeter. So it uses the principle of spectrophotometry, in that the oxidized hemoglobin and the reduced hemoglobin, or the deoxyhemoglobin will absorb infrared and red lights at different wavelengths, and depending on that, the proportion of the percentages of each can be calculated using the, that is how the probe is designed. And also, it can differentiate between a pulsatile flow and a non-pulsatile flow. So basically, the percentage of oxyhemoglobin versus deoxyhemoglobin and pulsatile flow versus non-pulsatile flow. This is to differentiate arterial blood from venous blood, capillary blood, and other static tissues. So when you combine these data, you will get the oxyhemoglobin concentration of arterial blood. Now, EtCO2 monitoring, the capnography is based on, again, it's absorption spectrometry of the infrared radiation at specific wavelengths by CO2 molecules. It's a similar principle. Photodetectors in the capnograph tuned to these wavelengths enable calculation of CO2 levels in the breath sample. So there are photodetectors which will, the CO2 molecules in the expired air will absorb the light at a particular wavelength, just like this pulse oximeter, and that is again used to calculate the fraction of EtCO2, and it is expressed as a numerical value. Though it is primarily a monitor of ventilation, it can provide information regarding circulation and also metabolism. That is, if the pulmonary circulation, the cardiac, the systemic circulation and all are depressed, it will show in the entitled CO2 value because the transport of carbon dioxide will be affected. And it also throws light on body metabolism, hypermetabolic conditions and all, it will increase, CO2 production will increase. So that is about EtCO2 monitoring. And the oxygen analyzer, as we said, is the most important monitor with regard to the patient safety. And an oxygen analyzer with an audible alarm is recommended in all modern workstations. It is located either at the common gas outlet or the inspiratory limb of the circle system. And as opposed to the EtCO2 and pulse oximeter, they use paramagnetic analyzers. It's a different kind of analyzer, the principle involved is different. And they are designed to be accurate, sensitive, and fast. So this is basically a review of what the basic monitoring standards are, the two standards, and how the basic ways in which you should apply each one of them, the most basic instruments involved. I hope this will, give you some idea about the basic monitoring standards and all in anesthesia. Thank you very much for your patient listening.